All right.
Welcome to MySec Jackson, our first meeting of 2019.
Woo!
Our speaker tonight is going to be Jim Beechey, talking a little bit about cybersecurity year review, question and answer, all that fun stuff. Kind of a free-for-all tonight.
It is free-for-all.
If you're on the internet land, let me know any questions you have, and I will relay them over.
Do we got anybody on the stream?
I think we do. We usually do get a couple.
Yeah. Other than Kate. Hi, Kate. Love you, Kate.
Let's see if she's even on. Maybe I have a place I can post this stream.
Oh my gosh, is that? Yeah, we might do this. All right. All right. So I'll get started. Tell you a little bit about myself, and then kind of dive in. This is really meant to be a discussion conversation. I'm going to try to bring you in a little bit. So those of you who are a little more introverted, like actually most of us all are. I say that with love because I'm the same way. But I don't know. I'm trying something a little different tonight. No PowerPoint. I got a few notes. Got a couple websites, but want to try a little discussion format. See how it goes. So maybe it'll be great. Maybe it won't. I am the director of security here at Consumers. So I lead both physical and cyber for the company. But my background is cyber. I'm definitely a technical person at heart. So love being here, especially with as many college students as we have in the room, and now high school student. I think that's awesome. So we're going to do two things. I'll do a talk kind of on what I saw happen last year, but also what a little bit, not predictions, but a little bit what we're thinking about for 2019. And then I want to end with kind of a Q&A where you can just ask me anything. It doesn't have to be about the talk. It can be just about anything. I like to do that when we have these kind of audiences, especially people who are coming up in the industry, and see what we can do to help and maybe answer some of your questions. So Consumers, great place to be. We have a pretty big security team. We're pushing, I don't know if you count interns and things like that, around 70 people, 70. So it's a big group. But as I mentioned, physical and cyber. My background, I've been in the industry, I don't know, really since around 98. So we're pushing 20 years. Kind of crazy. And I did a bunch of different things. My sort of passion is forensics and IR. If I could do logs all day, I'd be really happy. Now I do PowerPoint and Excel and, like human resources kind of stuff. But I love that part of my job too. There's nothing like seeing people succeed. And we have a great team full of lots of really amazing people here. So it's fun that we get to share that with you on a monthly basis. So what I wanted to talk about is a little bit about last year. And every year, I try to, when we go away for the holidays, try and take some time off. And I like to take stock about sort of where we are, where we've been, where things are heading. And every time I've done this in the last 10 years, 15 years, if you will, every year it's like, I don't think it can get any worse. And it gets way worse, frankly. Now, I will tell you, I don't actually feel that way about 18. I don't think that it got worse. Now, maybe some people would think, well, how can a dumpster fire get worse? But every year it got worse, trust me. I mean, if we want to start mapping back from 2010 on or 20, I remember chasing stupid viruses that would just, shut down Outlook because they would spread because they would look up people's contact lists, right? That was like what we used to deal with back in the day, or a website defacement. Kind of in the early 2000s and 90s, and now, we're dealing with things like ransomware that, in 2017, cost some companies $400 million. I mean, that's insane, right? There were literally, I was listening to companies' quarterly conferences with their shareholders to see how bad the cyber event was, right? That's kind of mind-boggling for us. Interference in our elections, right? Whatever Russia did or didn't do, however much you believe they did or did not influence, they certainly attempted. So 2016, right? That was crazy. 16 and 15, we had an electric grid get taken down in Ukraine. Things that obviously we worry about here significantly. And in 17, it was bad. There was data breaches left, right, and center. There was attacks all over the place. But there wasn't that next escalation, I guess I would argue. And I would say that, I guess I would say in general that it felt like a little bit of more status quo. Now, things don't always happen in a calendar year, right? So we'll see over time. And I'm not saying by any stretch that I think that we've plateaued. I think it certainly could get worse. But as we think back about 17, or 18, sorry, getting my years mixed up. That's kind of the premise I've developed in my own head, whether you agree or not. So to start off, I want to talk about what were some of the big breaches or some of the big events in 18. Does anybody want to throw one out? And I will challenge you, can anyone name the biggest data breach in 18? No phones, no Googling. But can anybody name sort of the biggest data breach? And then just talk through what you think some of the big events were of last year. That was the year before. I know, right? It's hard when you live in this game. What was a big? You're gonna name one from last year, but it's actually not gonna be the biggest one. And I'll give somebody a prize if they actually come up with the biggest one. So Marriott's number 2. Number 2. Maersk was, you're thinking about ransomware, right? Yeah, it was the year before. Marriott, so that Marriott Starwood. So Marriott, right? We don't say Marriott, we have to say Starwood because Starwood's what got breached before Marriott bought them. I'm being facetious, right? But that's how you downplay these things, you know. So about, 500 million records? They may have downgraded that to 300 million. They were in the network for how long? Like 4 years? That's a bad day, right? If you're a security team, and this is one of the things we preach here, is bad things are going to happen, but judge us whether or not, how we can detect and respond to those events, right? If you're at 4 years, that's a resume-generating event, shall we say.
Internet asked Facebook.
Nice try. Well done, Internet. No. Nice try, Kate. Facebook. Facebook's a good one. What happened at Facebook? A couple things happened at Facebook. Anybody know? So there's one where somebody figured out how to steal like user tokens and basically like log into anybody's account. I don't know how many millions it was. The irony was, do you know how they actually did that or what feature they took advantage of to do that? Not Messenger, close. I think you're. I know what it is. So the irony is, it was a feature they built to be able to check your privacy, to see what other people could see about your page, right? So I could check and see what can the world see about me. Are my settings, my privacy settings strong or something? They took advantage of, they probably, frankly, we all have this pressure, rush things to market. Maybe didn't do the right testing. I'm hypothesizing, but there was a flaw in that. It's sort of the no good deed goes unpunished. So I don't know, several 20 million, something like that, tokens. And then the other big one, it's kind of a privacy thing, more political thing. Bree's Googling back there. Cambridge Analytica. Everybody remember that one? Oh, yeah. Cambridge Analytica, where, you could debate whether it's a breach, I guess. I don't know. They basically allowed this company to mine their data sort of inappropriately for political, I don't know what, you can argue the intent, but Facebook had a rough year.
I'm just going to raise my hand whenever the internet talks.
Awesome. Internet. The internet who's probably Googling.
VPN filter.
Good one. That's a great one. It's not the biggest one, but it's a great one. VPN filter. Was that Kate again?
No, that was Null Space and
Who?
People on the internet.
People on the internet. All right. Anybody know what happened with VPN filter? It's a great one. So basically, most of us, some of us have bigger gear, but most people have a home router, right? So about, 500,000, it depends who you ask, right? Somebody figured out a vulnerability in these routers and they compromised a bunch of them. So 500,000 of them got compromised. So think of it kind of like you could argue it's an Internet of Things attack, although this is the device that's supposed to kind of insulate you from the internet, right? It's doing your NAT for you. It's doing maybe a little bit of security protection. So the theory was that well, what was happening is these home routers were getting taken over, and all the traffic that would be coming through them, obviously the adversary could, in theory, inspect or view or do some other things. One of the things I was thinking about when I was talking about this attack or this talk is, we all have things in our home network that are like horribly insecure. Like, thank God we have something in front of them, right? We all have these IoT devices or whatever you want, or we stood up a Microsoft box that has no patches because we wanted to practice hacking or whatever. So I kind of was thinking about how cool VPN filter could have been from an attack standpoint as kind of like a multi-stage, right? Where you compromise the router and now you're on the inside interface of your home internet. And the things that you can do from sort of a wormable attack or a script kind of attack could have been really interesting if somebody would have combined those two. It doesn't appear that they did. And I think it's 500,000 devices with my notes. Yeah, about 500,000 devices. So kind of created a botnet with routers, which is kind of interesting. These things are also, a lot of them are so old that companies weren't, making new code for them, let alone, can you, this isn't like click automatic update, right? Imagine your grandparents having to upgrade the code on their router. That's not going to happen. Good one on the list, not the top one. Wells Fargo, good one. What? I didn't have that on my list. Do you remember what happened? I wonder if it's in this list on the internet that I have.
No, because I remember it was the second thing that happened because a couple years ago they had that issue with the fraudulent.
Yeah.
But I think there was a cyber breach this past year as well related to Wells Fargo.
Oh, see, now this is going to be hard because I have to look this way. This is going to be impossible.
What would you Google it, buddy?
I know, right?
Don't worry, you're using Edge, so.
I'm not.
Is that IE?
It's regular IE, man.
Sorry.
Hold on, I got to do something here. Apologies. Let's do PC screen and duplicate. Because I have to be able to see what I'm clicking on here. All right. Escape, Bueller. So I'll talk about this research. This is a pretty cool resource. From Business Insider, they have their top 25 breaches. This is where I did some of the research. Let's see if we can find Wells Fargo or not. Another one that one of the things that was interesting about last year, I'll talk about this as we look through it. There's Cambridge Analytical, only 87 million. Number 7. The definition of a breach is getting interesting too. So people are starting to care not just about social security numbers and credit card numbers, but in this kind of privacy conscious world, you're seeing breaches where names, email addresses, hashed or encrypted passwords even, people are, not I'm saying that that's not serious, it is, but the definition of a breach has almost become, it's become this word that has all these different meanings. And when we think about data here, we obviously think about it with increasing levels of sensitivity. And so not all breaches are created equal, I guess was kind of interesting. But there was a lot of fitness apps that had problems. A lot of people, using social media. Quora was one of the sites that had a problem, over 100 million. And so there was just a lot of this user data that people are wondering who would want that data. There's some people, by the way, there's an ongoing theory in the community that I think is fairly accurate, that a lot of what China is doing when they conduct some of these breaches is they're building these massive databases on American citizens to sort of figure out different things about them, either for intelligence purposes or even for training things like AIs and things like that. I need a big data set to train my machine learning or my AI. Well, I don't want to create it, so let me just go grab it from some stupid vendor that is doing poor security. Because some of these have gotten to the point where it's like, well, is there value in that? Is there a monetary value? Probably not. Everybody's email address, it's pretty easy to get. So where are people coming from on those? All right, so I don't think we're going to guess because I didn't know it, by the way. I'm not picking on you guys. We're going to put 500,000.
I looked up the Wells Fargo one. It's not even really a breach.
Okay.
Someone accidentally sent files they weren't supposed to somebody.
Gotcha. I'll be honest with you, though. I worry about that. Like here, on a day-to-day basis, we've had some close calls where, you know, it's like, yikes, that stuff can bite you so quickly. Ooh, the internet.
Internet question. So how are we defining biggest? Money lost?
Yes.
Impacted?
This would be number of
Data
breaches.
lost?
Number of records,
Number of records.
according to this conversation. Because I agree, that is a subjective statement. So number of records.
When you calculate the cost, are you calculating the cost to the company, the financial harm to the company, or
This is
the cost to the people who've been?
This is just number of records. That's all it is, because you're spot on. Calculating the cost in terms of the company or in terms of sort of impact to that community is really, really tough. And frankly, that's where courts start to argue, right? You see class actions now. Every time you have a breach, there's usually a class action that starts, and that's what they try to show as the harm done to the individuals. I haven't seen anyway something where I could say there's kind of a standard around that. So this is just number of records. All right. The big reveal, which like I said, I did not get this either. I was floored, actually, when I looked at this, because I thought for sure it was Marriott. MyFitnessPal was up there. That was like number 3. We'll go through the big ones. I don't even know how to say this. Adhar. 1.1 billion records. Crazy, right? And look what they got. Indian residents from India, right? Names, ID numbers. So it's effectively, it was like the U.S. lost their Social Security number database, right? And then they say, and information on connected services like bank accounts. So it's kind of, they don't know when it was breached, which is kind of scary. So it has their identity and biometric info. So India apparently has a centralized database. This kind of feels like the OPM hack that the government employees suffered through a couple years back. And what's interesting is they reference a state-owned utility company that they suffered a data leak on a system run by a state-owned utility. So I'm like, okay, that'd be like us, although we're not state-run, right? But having access to like a Social Security number database and somehow being the conduit by which that occurred, crazy scary. And an unsecured API, which is quite common. So 1.1 billion for this Adhar, I'll call it. So this was kind of cool. It was, I'll give Kyle the links if anybody wants to check them out. But these were, this was a good article on kind of the top 25, and I certainly learned something new because I thought it would be this Marriott Starwood for sure. Number 3 was this Exactus. This is kind of one of these big data brokers, sort of like the, what did you mention earlier, Kyle? Equifax, yeah, kind of that kind of deal. So these are the big ones. Data breaches, MyFitnessPal, 150 million. Let's talk, though, a little bit, as I sort of scroll through here. The other thing that, these are breaches, right? We saw a continued sort of nation-state espionage attacks. Like, they just kept happening constantly, and actually they happened a lot more than I think most of us realize. Another resource I've got here that I think is a great one, we'll provide the link as well, is from, if I can click, for the Center for Strategic and International Studies. So this is kind of a think tank in Washington, D.C. that deals a lot with government research and different sort of government, high-level geopolitical issues. And they track, and this is a great document, significant cyber incidents since 2006, but this is very focused on things that have happened in the geopolitical space. And when you read the number of things that happened in 2018 that, frankly, you never heard of because they didn't make the news, it's pretty staggering. And I think we all know in this community, like, that nation states are doing this constantly. but I was surprised at how often it's actually detected or known, and how much we just sort of have learned to just accept it, right? And this is not all against U.S., right? Chinese against the EU in this first one. But this is a really interesting article to take a look at. Again, if you're studying this field and you want to kind of see what I would view as the escalation over the past 10, 12 years, this is a neat document to kind of keep track of. But, you know, we're not talking about, we hear a lot in the U.S. about, you know, Chinese attackers getting indicted, right? There's like these 2 or 3 events a year where the U.S. makes some big statement. But these kind of events are happening all the time. I mean, we're scrolling and we're still in December, right? It's pretty impressive. They will in here talk about some major data breaches as well. But you see the big players, China, North Korea, Iran, you know, some of those kind of things. The big players you would expect to see. A lot of Russian stuff as well. But right, we're only to November. We're on page 2. So the amount of espionage that is happening, I think we all know it's happening. I was surprised to see the amount that's actually getting caught. And somebody is doing some attribution. Now, you can debate whether their attribution is accurate, whether it's politically motivated, whether they could even tell. But it's pretty clear that this is continuing to happen, and it's going to continue to happen for many years to come. All right, let's see if I can do this correctly now.
It almost feels like nation states are starting to understand how cheap it is to build a cyber program. And those investments like 5 years ago are now starting to pay off.
Yeah, and I think, you know, I think that it's not just, you're right, and it's not just the major players anymore, right? If you're a developing nation, let's just say in Africa, we'll pick somewhere. You've seen what people have been able to do, and you're right, Kyle, how it's, you know, you're essentially needing to train people, but if you look at the cost compared to doing something in the traditional spy game, it's remarkable how much cheaper it is. And a lot of this is focused on U.S. interests, right? Let's imagine you're in a developing country. You know, we wouldn't even hear about issues that are going on, let's say, between a government that's trying to change power, or you know, some folks who are, even just from a monetary standpoint, right? This is all like big time nation state stuff. But yeah, if you're starting a country somewhere, you want a cyber capability. There's no question. All right, so espionage continued. I think we all would sort of surmise that made sense. You know, the good news, I kind of talked about this before, there wasn't any, you know, public major critical infrastructure events. So we didn't see another grid attack. We didn't see, you know, telecommunications being taken down, things like that. And I mean, this is a little bit of a debatable point, and it was midterm election, so it wasn't presidential. But I don't think we saw interference in the U.S. midterm elections like a lot of people thought. You know, people were interested to see what Russia would do post 2018. Post 2016, in 2018, and I would argue that people didn't see what they thought they would see, I guess is a way to put it. Meaning there was some, I don't think there's any question there was some interference. There's certainly some bots. There's some trolling, whatever. But it didn't feel like, and this is a bit of conjecture, but it didn't feel like there was a strong attempt to influence. Now, that doesn't mean we won't see it in 2020, right? And it's going to be really interesting to see whether our country, in our sort of divided nature that we are, especially now that we have, you know, Democrats in control one place, Republicans in control else, but you know, are we going to get to the point where the United States takes a stand against election interference in 2020 is going to be really interesting. But 2018 didn't, I don't believe, and this is a bit of my opinion, I don't think 2018 escalated in any way. I think clearly there was more activity in 2016. Pretty interesting. I don't know if that's good or bad, to be honest with you, because I think we need a little bit of a wake-up call to say to our adversaries, like, this is something that should be sacred. We're not going to, you know, we're not going to sort of stand for that. So I guess, you know, to conclude this kind of thought, again, bad year. You could argue this is awful, and it was awful, right? Let's not argue. This is 500 million records, 500,000 devices, 70 million. I mean, the numbers are staggering, but I would still argue that it wasn't as bad as 17. It wasn't as bad as 16. You know, maybe it was there with 15, or I don't even know 15, to be honest with you. Now, I'm not saying I don't know why, and this is not, there's no like causation here. It could get way worse this year. I don't know. But I think it's interesting to watch and see how these things sort of escalate. Go ahead, Kyle.
Yeah, and I think we even saw a big difference from the previous year.
Yeah.
Just the number of like, in general, cyber criminal attempts or campaigns that went out. I felt 2017 there's a lot more. In 2018, there was a lot less.
I agree.
We did not spend as much time like digging into each malware sample and going to town because we really didn't see as much.
Mm-hmm.
So it was really weird.
It was. And so interesting thing just to share with you guys. So in my seat, when things are quiet, I actually get nervous because I'm worried about what we're missing. Seriously.
Yeah.
And it's a weird kind of double-edged sword, but it was a quiet year for us. Kyle's absolutely right. And so what I worry about is, geez, are we missing the boat? You know, we asleep at the wheel. When we're catching things, I'm sort of like, okay, we're there, we're good. But I don't disagree. You know, interesting year. So let's sort of pivot then and talk about some thoughts for this year, and maybe things that I'm a little concerned about, or we may see some escalation. The U.S. in the last sort of couple months has been a lot tougher on, especially China, a little more on Russia. We've indicted some people, right? Some Chinese hackers. Hackers, I hate that word because I actually like the word hacker. It doesn't mean they're criminals. Some Chinese, you know, we'll say state-sponsored adversaries. Hacker should be a good term, not a bad one. Some Russian folks got indicted recently. Some North Koreans have been indicted. And it's going to be interesting to see if there's any blowback to that. And in some ways, you could argue we've already seen it, right? So you've got this Huawei executive. Huawei is the Chinese company that a lot of American firms will not use. I think the government pretty much forbids it because they believe that they're, you know, sort of affiliated with Chinese national interests. We may get, you know, compromised phones or compromised routers or whatever, right? Pre-built with the back door in them for them. So you've got this Chinese Huawei executive. The U.S. believes Huawei is violating terms of basically sanctions, embargoes that we have against nations like Iran. They asked the Canadians to arrest this CFO when she was visiting in Vancouver. The Canadians oblige. And she's basically the daughter of the founder of the company, I think is what it is. So since then, I think it's 22 Canadians have been detained in China, right? They must be, you know, whatever, right? The Chinese are having some pretty strong rhetoric at the U.S., saying this is ridiculous, you can't do it. We're strongly saying, well, you've broken these international norms that we put forward as far as sanctions. You know, and it's going to be a court battle to even see if we can extradite her or not. But the point is, whether it's that, whether it's indicting these adversaries, we are escalating. And will there be blowback? It'll be interesting to see. I don't know. Some people have said that when the Obama administration made this deal with China, there was a dip in espionage, or at least economic attacks, I should say, where they're stealing our intellectual property. That seems to have kind of come back, and certainly these things that our government is doing will only escalate that. Now, I'm not saying our government shouldn't. I'm not saying that. I'm saying this is really a tough issue, right? So I think what I would submit to you is I think we'd stand here a year from now and we may see worse sort of events come out of China. I don't know that they're going to, you know, do something destructive or, you know, do something military or kinetic. I'm not saying that, but I think that they're pretty ticked off at us, and, you know, we're escalating. Now, you got to draw the line somewhere. So these are the tough issues that politicians and policymakers have to make. But I think it's worth it. It's worth thinking about.
Makes me worried, that's for sure.
Yeah, it does. And well, let's actually, Kyle brings up a good point. It's one I wanted to make. So there are some people who I've met who used to work for the U.S. government doing, computer network intrusions. We have indicted people who are doing this work on behalf of the Chinese. Now we say, well, you're doing this for intellectual property theft, for economic advantage. We only hack, this is what we say, we only hack for espionage or spying or whatever, which most people agree is kind of a norm. But if you used to hack on behalf of the US government, what risk are you now at, right? Are you now a target? Can you travel outside the US and be concerned that you might be indicted or charged? I use the word indicted like I don't know what the Chinese term for it is. And there's people openly talking about this. So while we sort of all celebrate when our government attributes an attack to a specific person, the downstream consequences aren't really known, right? It's easy to say that this is a really good idea, and I was talking to somebody at a conference who talks pretty openly about this, and he really has challenged the community to think differently because he said, well, you're kind of putting now the targets on my back, so is this a good thing or a bad thing, given that we likely will never arrest these people? The only chance they have of standing trial is if they screw up and sort of go on a U.S. vacation or decide to go to London and we figure out a way. So it's interesting issues, and I wish I had all the answers, but I don't.
Didn't they arrest someone at an international airport in the secure zone because it was something like international territory or somewhere where they could pick them up
Sure.
and arrest them?
Yeah, I don't know what you're specifically referring to, but there have been a lot of instances where the U.S. has figured out ways to lure people into either international territory or into the U.S., right? But those days, that gig's kind of up. People know that's probably not going to work. And frankly, those were typically criminals, who were cyber criminals, right? A nation-state actor, like somebody who's working for the Chinese PLA, the Chinese probably aren't going to let them leave the country, frankly. So yeah, it'll be an interesting one. Russia's the other one, right? We all know that Russia has a strong capability. Our relationship with them is really weird because on one hand, people can make an argument that our president is friends with them. He's had, stronger words recently for them, but certainly there's a lot of, United States political system in general are frustrated with Russians' interference in our elections, with some of the things they've done in Europe as far as assassinations. They're a little crazier, I'll just say it that way, right? So China likely isn't going to do something destructive or China's worried about economic espionage, right? We're going to steal your intellectual property, we're going to make the next best AI, we're going to steal your biotech, whatever. Russia's a little more on that fringe, so I don't know that we've escalated as much with them, but it's something to watch. And will Russia be willing to do more? They've done some pretty crazy things in Ukraine, right? I mean, if you talk about some of the even viruses they let loose, this whole WannaCry, NotPetya, who did what North Korea did, what Russia did, but some of these things were certainly had their involvement. Pretty reckless actions. So they're a different breed. But at the same time, maybe we're not putting as much pressure. China really has become the focus, I think, from a policy standpoint. So something to think about. The other big one is, well, I've got two more. Privacy. This isn't really a technical issue, but privacy and the privacy of our data, our citizens' data, is becoming just a massive issue. You talk about Cambridge Analytica, you talk about the problems Facebook got into. You can kind of correlate it to data breaches, but it's more about privacy. I think of it in terms of more, not did you lose the data or did it get stolen, but how are you using it? How are you on a day-to-day basis using that data? Who are you sharing it with knowingly and intentionally? Who is collecting data for one purpose and then using it for something 2 and 3 purposes down, right? The one I think about all the time, and I tell family members, like, don't send your DNA to these 23andMe and all these other companies. Like, I don't know what the ramifications of doing that are long term. We're going to find out.
Are A big pharmaceutical
Exactly.
company just like bought into a majority share into
23andMe just got bought by pharmaceutical. Now, some will argue that's going to produce medical breakthroughs we could never dream of, and that might be true, right? Or some would argue that you're going to figure out who's predisposed to what conditions and charge them more for insurance, or not cover them when they join, certain company. I don't know. But the ramifications around privacy are huge, and there's a couple forces at work, okay? So if you've heard of GDPR, and I apologize for going on the compliance path, but we all sometimes have to deal with compliance and security. It's not all bits and bytes. GDPR, which is the EU's privacy regulation, was a big shock to the system, and it's a beast. There's no question. It's not overly prescriptive. There's a lot of rights that were assigned to individuals, whether you agree with that or not. This is a fact. So things like you have the right to know what people are storing on you. You have the right to say that it's been, to ask that it be removed. All these kinds of things, right? Well, so you've got that going on, and you've got some people in the U.S. saying that would be a good idea. You've certainly got U.S. companies who are having to comply with it if they do business in the EU or with EU citizens. And then what's more interesting at home is California just passed a law that is pretty much, it's not a GDPR exactly, but it has some very strict privacy regulations. And a lot of people's theory is that the Facebooks and the Googles of the world were really held hostage because of some of these events, like Cambridge Analytica. They couldn't fight it, right? Politically, they could not fight it. So they sort of said, okay, they gave in on that. But we have a problem in this country where right now there is not a national data breach law. So like 43 or 44 or 45, something like that, states have data breach laws. So somebody like me has to worry about a data breach law in 45 different times over that might be slightly different each. So now the concern is, are each individual states going to start enacting data or privacy rules? And then therefore you sort of have this desire to have a federal privacy mandate so that you have one law. At the same time, people are inflamed, but will our legislature and the president agree on anything, right? I mean, seriously, can we get our politicians to agree on anything? So I don't know. I think that the stage is set to see a privacy regulation at the federal level, and I actually believe the Facebooks and the Googles want that because they don't want to deal with a bunch of states, and frankly, they'd like to make the California law maybe a little less of a pain for them. But so they may actually be giving in. And you're also seeing the Apples of the world. You guys notice this? Apple is all of a sudden touting themselves as this, like, we don't use your data, we're privacy safe, we're like, we don't understand when you get up in the morning. We're just a hardware company. So you're starting to see people use that as a business advantage. And so I would say, I don't know if you asked me, would I bet that we have a law by next year? I think I'd say yes. Now it's maybe 55%. Like, I wouldn't bet a lot of money, but I think we will. And I will tell you, as somebody who works in the industry, I would much rather have a single federal law that's reasonable and pragmatic versus having to comply and figure out when state number 25 enacts a law and then, okay, South Dakota did this and things like that. Because you'd think, well, you're a Michigan utility, you're fine. But the reality is the laws apply to wherever that person is residing at today. So when a person who leaves Michigan for the winter and goes to Florida, right, they might still have a house here, but their residence is in Florida. Like, do I have to deal with Florida laws or Michigan laws? It gets complicated, let alone somebody who retires and moves somewhere else. So I would like to see a federal law, but, and again, this is Jim's opinion, just Jim's personal opinion. But it's going to be something that we're going to have to deal with. So interesting. And then the last one that this one scares me more than anything. I'm worried that we're going to see we don't have a great term for it. There's actually somebody on Twitter from Mandiant the other day trying to talk to people about what we should coin this. So this is ransomware, but it isn't the ransomware you're used to, where literally the virus or the worm or the attacker just goes and tries to encrypt as much crap as they can. I like to think of it as targeted ransomware, where you get into an environment, you establish some kind of foothold or persistence, and then you strategically and tactfully only ransom the most critical systems, right? So we think that this happened with some printing newspaper companies in the beginning of January, it looks like that's what it was. I think of it as, again, I call it targeted ransomware. That's the term some people use. We're in the industry, they're kind of debating what it would be. But ransomware by itself it's destructive, but if you have the right controls or detections in place, you can see it spreading, right? You can see that Kyle's hard drive got encrypted, and then Luke's hard drive, and then they tried to get debris, and then they went to the server, right? So you've got time, whereas if they went for your most sensitive system first, that's a bad day. And frankly, ransomware authors are really not overly sophisticated today. I mean, they're still good code and they're good malware, but they're not nation state level stuff, right? Well, what if those guys started doing this? That's the stuff that there's not a lot that sort of keeps me up at night, and that's something I'm thinking about. I'm not saying it's going to happen this year, but we saw ransomware probably hit its peak sometime in 17, right, with the WannaCry NotPetya. Last year, it became more about crypto mining when Bitcoin's prices were way up, when Monero was way up. People stopped like ransoming, and they started using those computers to mine, coins, right? And then there's a big Bitcoin crash. The values are down. So I'm a little worried people are going to shift back to kind of the ransomware stuff, and again, do it maybe a little more targeted, a little more intelligently. And frankly, if you look at the amount of money that an attacker was charging a major corporation to unlock their systems, it's very small, right? Billion-dollar companies in revenue, and you're going to, 50,000, they're paying that like that. People say, why would you ever pay? Because it would cost you 50 times more, right? The great example in the media, I think last year or year before, was the city of Atlanta, who said, we will not pay. They didn't pay the $50,000, and they ended up spending like $2 to $4 million to fix it, right? The financial people here that, it's a pretty easy math. Now, you're paying off criminals. I get it. I don't want to do that either. But my argument would be that these folks could charge a whole heck of a lot more, especially if they get more targeted. Take down the right systems, charge a lot more. I'm not trying to give anybody ideas. Again, highly illegal and don't recommend it, but this is something I'm worried about.
I'd almost say that you saw that shift from crypto miners back to ransomware.
Yeah.
From the summer.
Really? Emotet? Yeah,
and
yeah.
that one just sprung up hard and fast, and there was a huge campaign.
You're absolutely right.
And that was really interesting to go through because you had like this kind of used to be commodity malware that was basically having new modules added to it, so they would easily evade AD, easily evade like your classic kind of email filters, and they were kind of using some just kind of the same macros that you'd usually see in a Word document, but they used stuff like DOS obfuscation where they made it like impossible to tell what was going on. And security tools at the time didn't know what to do with it. Or doing stuff where they actually make a text field in the Word document and they make it super small in the corner so it looks like a pixel, but they store the PowerShell in there. So like it's super sophisticated on this like document or this PDF to click on, but the infrastructure is so bad that it would instantaneously get picked up. And so like if you had any type of proxy or any like security appliances that had like a threat feed for like bad domains, IPs, stuff like that, they were automatically blocked in like 10 seconds. But that was huge. Like that was the biggest increase that we had.
Yeah, you're right.
Starting from the summer when that sprung up.
Yeah, you're right. Almost all of our incidents in the last half of the year were Emotet. Is that how you say it? Emotet?
I don't know.
Emotet. I mean,
Everybody
right?
says it differently.
I know. We always make up these words and then we don't tell people how to pronounce them. Right? It's pretty funny.
We can make a webpage off it actually.
We should.
An Egyptian god or priest or something.
Is that what it is? Emotet. Okay. Good one. See, you learned something from everybody. That's great. And what's interesting is I talked about that targeted ransomware. There's people who believe that Emotet, whatever you guys said it better than I did, was sort of the way that they initially got in, and then once they had their foothold, they went and deployed their more targeted attack. Again, I'm always very careful to talk about what really happened. Number one, I don't know. Number two, it takes months to do a really good investigation, so that's the only reason I'm cautious. I've always seen through my career that the thing you think happened right away is usually not even close to what really happened, so I'm always a little cautious to give people the benefit of the doubt there. But So that's kind of what I had today. I mean, it was kind of fun, good to interact with you guys on sort of what's happening last year, what's happening this year. Just kind of wanted to spitball it with you guys and see where we head. So I will open it up to any question now, whether it's about this talk or anything else. So does the internet have a question?
Yeah, we've got one queued up here.
All right.
Anthony. He was asking in general kind of about one thing that we should focus on InfoSec-wise from, going from 2018 to 2019.
Good question.
That you had to go to town on, what would be?
Good question. So, gosh, I hate giving the consultant a depends answer. I am a big believer in, first and foremost, in fundamentals, okay? Everybody wants to chase AI, machine learning, blah, 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 blah. No, get fundamentals. Probably the most important in those fundamentals is two-factor authentication. If your accounts don't have two-factor authentication in today's day and age, they absolutely 100% will get compromised at some point if anybody tries, okay? And even two-factor authentication isn't perfect. But what I think we've seen in a lot of these breaches were the result of administrative credentials being compromised because someone logged into a web server and didn't have two-factor or whatever. So I would say number one, two-factor by probably a large amount. The second thing, I guess, and he only asked for one, but I'll give him a couple, is configuration management, or sort of managing how you are going to the cloud, was an absolute nightmare last year. People leaving, in Amazon world, your storage is called S3 buckets, leaving them world readable, where you have your sensitive data and the application can see it because, well, the whole world can see it, right? It's like we've gone back to the basics when we didn't have firewalls and we put like IIS-4 servers on the internet and they got popped. Imagine that. One of the biggest worms of all time, SQL slammers, because we had SQL servers on the internet, right? Well, now we're putting MongoDB on the internet with default credentials and wondering how it got popped. So it's weird. So it would be two-factor, and then as you're moving these things to SaaS and cloud, like getting those guardrails around them. I guess those would be my top two that I'm sort of thinking about in specific terms. Generally, though, fundamentals. Manage your credentials, manage your administrative accounts, patch your systems, two-factor, like segregating and segmenting your devices into different areas of your network. It's the basic stuff that can really prevent the vast majority of these attackers. Teaching people about phishing. That's like, we spend so much time on that as like issue number one for us, because almost every attack we see starts with phishing, or every incident we have starts with phishing. So, good question. What else? Dun dun dun. Pressure's on. Yes, sir.
So, do you have an idea of what's going to be a bigger threat? Either kind of like you mentioned the SQL attacks, how it used to be, and then we have MongoDBs.
Right.
So it's kind of like I guess cycling back to what used to be, and just in a different format. Do you think it's going to be more of that, or things like nation-state actors getting more technical, more advanced, with like the targeted ransomware?
Yeah, bigger it just, I guess it means bigger to who? Do I think that we are going to get worse at putting really insecure systems on the internet? Yeah, I think it's going to get worse, right? Yeah, or people are going to, if you talk about VPN filter, right? But if people could, I don't think people understand how much we are relying on home routers to like obfuscate these systems, right? Just the fact that you're doing NAT out to your, out to the internet is like saving most people from a complete, meltdown in their homes. So if somebody can figure out how to, sort of move around those things, so I think this whole Internet of Things, whatever you want to call it, I do think will be a bigger issue, but I think the impact in the nation-state side from a corporation, I'm more worried about that. Okay. But I worry about how we are gonna deal with people are continuing to just put anything out there, and what we see, no matter I think what industry or what area, is everybody who's rushing to put a product out is not, it's just not building the fundamentals into those products, right? The Microsofts and the Googles and the folks who have been doing this for a long time and have big R&D teams, they do it pretty darn well, frankly. They still struggle at times, but this guy who's building the latest IoT device that just downloaded any Linux distribution he could find, right? He's worried about selling his boxes, not making them safe. So I don't know. I hope that answered your question, but
Yeah, no, it does.
I worry about for a day-to-day job. I worry about more of the targeted stuff. But yes, sir.
What's the nation state that we don't hear about that you think might be a problem in the future?
U.S. Yeah. Look, let's not kid ourselves. We hack.
Yeah.
I mean, we hack and we're darn good at it. I guess in theory, don't do it for economic stuff.
I mean, if you look at the NSA tool, that's not really true either. Because weren't half of those pretty much for economic stuff?
Well, I think it's hard to say what their intent was. They're clearly, those tools, their intent was to compromise. Now, could you say that shadow brokers or whatever, some of those tools, they ended up being used for economic stuff, right? They started, these worms. And again, whose definition of economics, right? If you're the regime that the U.S. is trying to take down, you can argue. So I don't know. When I make these statements, this is what our government says. Whether I don't want to get too far into whether you believe them or not. But the nation state, I mean, I don't think there's any question. And I listen to a lot of, there's a podcast called Intelligence Matters that's put on by the former Deputy Director of the CIA, Michael Morrell, and he brings in all these policy people to talk about national security issues in general and intelligence issues. I don't think there's any question that people are more worried about China, okay? And that continues to be, it's very clear that the biggest sort of threat to the U.S. is China. Now, who are the under the radar people that worry about? I personally worry about the crazy regimes, right? I don't worry about China coming in and shutting down the electric grid, because if they did that, that would be such an act of aggression that the U.S. would, I can't imagine the U.S. wouldn't respond to. Now, am I worried about, the Irans and the North Koreas and I'm more worried about the fringe groups that are, let's face it, if ISIS hadn't been sort of displaced, if they had a place, for their kind of caliphate to sort of exist safely, they would be building cyber capabilities, no question, right? They have, right? And they do a great job of recruiting with it. But so I worry about those fringe groups as much or more than anything. That we think about these attacks in two phases. One is, do you have the capability to pull it off, and do you have the intent to do it? And China and Russia, if they did it, there would be some serious consequences. Whereas these fringe groups, man, they got both. Well, they don't necessarily have the capability, right? They don't have the capability necessarily. They certainly have the intent. So that's what I worry about. I worry about crazy dictators somewhere.
They don't have a lot to lose, too.
That's exactly it. Yeah, not a lot to lose. I agree, absolutely right. And a bone to pick with us, right, wrong, or indifferent, right? That they believe strongly for, and some would die for, right? That's a different level of motivation.
Yeah.
So, not that China, from a U.S. perspective, we should worry about, right? But I don't know, a little different in my day-to-day. But
So any other questions?
what else?
Yeah.
Yeah. Anything off topic? You got a question? Or sorry, I thought you were going to say something here in the front.
I was, but then he was pointing.
No, go ahead.
Go ahead.
The ransomware stuff.
Yeah.
Isn't some of the blame kind of on the companies getting hit because they
No
have
question.
improper
Oh, no question.
everything set up?
No question.
Okay.
I don't. No, number one, I try. When you sit in these shoes day to day, I try to not victim shame because at some point my day frankly has come. In my past I've had websites compromised and things lost, and we had websites defaced and SQL injection attacks where this is at a former place, so I'm not speaking of here, where we had like Viagra ads on our website, and you know what I mean? We've all had those days. So I really try not to victim shame, but yes. So if you are in an environment where a single phishing email can be clicked on by a systems administrator and that ransomware can spread with their administrative credentials like that, you're not doing, you're not, and you have any kind of security program, you're not doing your job, right? There's no question. And that's typically what we've seen in ransomware that's been successful, is it was the IT person who had administrative creds, and the minute they clicked, that malware ran as them and could go to every Windows box, right? So I don't think there's any question. But we live in a world where you will get compromised. And so I never want to blame people for being compromised, but certainly when you look back, should some of these companies feel like they should have done better? Absolutely.
Especially now that you have like snapshots and stuff. Like, I don't know if it's the same for, you guys use EMC for storage, right? Okay.
Something.
But,
We use lots of stuff. That's the problem.
Yeah.
We'd love to say that we use this, but there's in a big company like this, we use lots of stuff. But anyway, go ahead.
But with something like ZFS, you can snapshot
Yeah.
50 terabytes of changes, just roll it back in less than a minute.
Yeah.
And it's just,
But what's gotten interesting is the malware variants have caught on to that. So when they're spreading, they may actually be targeting backup servers, even file systems, and doing actual file system destruction.
Yeah. I mean, we've had incidents,
So
right,
it's-
where
a lot of it's been more on like the Windows side. So you've seen like the shadow copies that would do some of the things that you set up.
Yep.
They would actually aggressively target and destroy all your shadow copies first before they start encrypting.
But kind of what you're talking about is where I go to fundamentals, right? I mean, it's those basic fundamentals where if you can't stop that single phishing email from taking you down, that's a problem. But if you get any level of sophistication, and especially like Kyle kind of mentioned the backups, if you're sophisticated enough and you're going to go delete the backups before you encrypt, right? That's the stuff I get really nervous about. But I don't disagree. The challenge too is just responding to 1,000 encrypted laptops, right? Forget the big systems, but if as a company we had 1,000 laptops get encrypted, that would take a ton of time to actually deal with. There's stories of Saudi Aramco was the one who first got hit with this, right? Where they had, I don't know, it was like 100,000 machines. Their corporate assets essentially all got encrypted, right? There was like stories of them going and buying the market supply of physical hard drives, because that's how they were going to do this, was they were going to replace the physical hard drives in all these machines, to the point where they impacted the market for hard drives, right? Like, it's crazy. So I mean, I don't agree with, I don't disagree. There's a lot of blame to go around. I caution people on pointing the finger too much, because someday it'll probably be one of us, right? But it's fair.
The thing that you never see too is like the internal politics at that company.
Yeah, it's true.
Sometimes like the people that are there to protect and do everything, they're like, we need this, this, and this. And the company's like, we can only afford that, and we don't think that's a good idea. And you're like, what?
Right.
Like, we're recommending it, and then they don't do it, and then a breach happens, and they're like, we actually, here's like 3 times your normal salary budget now, so you do all the things that you told us to do before.
Yeah.
Another thing that always bugs me is like the people actually in control of the money for the IT is usually someone who has no idea.
It can, yeah. Sometimes it is. Sometimes when you're lucky that you have people that are in the know, it's usually when you have a better, more mature program for sure.
Yeah.
But yeah, the people that have no idea about tech that get dropped in, like that's. Yeah.
And it's tough for companies to see the light before they have an incident. I mean, it's tough. You can, you can talk about risk and you can, figure these things out, but it's.
It doesn't count until you see it happen.
It's tough, yeah, and then it's too late in some ways, or even then, it's still a tough decision, right? You want your help. Let me give perfect examples. Administrative creds. You want your help desk to be able to fix as many calls on the first call resolution as quickly as they can. So you give them admin access so they can do these things, right? Well, right, that's the same. Then they're gonna, if they click the phishing email, you're in trouble. So you got to figure out. What we try to do is, let's figure out the right way to do this in a secure, or at least we're managing the risk standpoint so that we can let you do what you want to do, meet your objective, but we're still not doing it, we're doing it safely. It's tough. All right, we're a little over, but I want to make sure anybody else has questions. Some of you guys are so quiet. I told you we couldn't be introverts. Come on, Chris.
So in IT, AI and machine learning are like the big buzzwords.
Yeah.
See that having an effect on security? Do you think we'll ever get to the point where AI managing your network or looking at things?
So let me answer sort of a long-winded answer. First and foremost, I do think automation is going to be massive for security, and I will tell you here, it's probably our biggest project this year is doing a ton of automation work where instead of somebody in our SOC having to go click, 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 we're doing a bunch of that, right? So I think if you do automation, it can set you up for some of those other things. I think the answer, I would say the answer is yes, that for sure machine learning and AI to some extent will get us some help and some efficiency. Do I think it will, I mean, maybe I'm just too old school. Do I think it will ever truly replace a significant number of human beings? I don't think so, but maybe I'm just, naive or biased. But right now, we've tried a lot of machine learning. Some people would say it's AI. There's a lot of snake oil. It is, sheesh, it's pretty bad. And some of the things that are working, you'll buy a product from some startup that's pretty cool and it works well, and then like an established vendor will put out like that exact same thing for free in like 3 days. And you're like, wait a second, it didn't take you that, So I'm skeptical, I guess, Chris, is the answer. I do think it'll help security. I think analytics is the way we're going to go, right? Finding anomalies and seeing things, especially for us in more controlled environments like a SCADA or an OT, where an anomaly should blip and tell us something, right? Those systems should be doing the same thing almost all the time. I'm just not, AI not yet, maybe machine learning. Long-winded answer, but.
The interesting thing to look at is when the automation is in play, the quality and the standardization that happens on every single thing that goes through it
right.
will be the same, whether that's good or bad, right? If you make
yeah,
a mistake,
it could be both.
You do it through everything, but
yeah.
On the flip side, that gives a lot more either incidents or events that you can do more triage or go deeper on than you were able to before.
Yep.
So I think that stuff is probably the coolest thing to see going forward.
And as a leader, I like it because I think in the long run it'll have our people spending as much time as they can on interesting work versus waiting for a disk image to to be pulled or a memory image or something. And some of that stuff is awful. Now there's counterpoint, which is if you don't ever learn the fundamentals, how do you sort of advance?
But if only we had like a faster network connection.
Yeah, right. That's pretty funny.
We talked about that.
I was gonna say, I don't think we can complain too much about that.
No.
Anything else?
Do you guys do Linux stuff here at all?
We do. Yeah, we have a large sort of quantity of Linux systems, and we've got some huge systems that like run our enterprise that are absolutely Linux. Yeah, there's tons of Linux work as well, and I think any major company, any company of any size really is going to have both. You're going to have Windows like crazy, but you're also going to have a lot of Linux. And a lot of our security tools, all these appliances people talk about, they effectively are a Linux kernel. Most of them, right, that have some kind of Linux command line. Our probably biggest security system is a Linux. At the end of the day, it's from a vendor, but it's Linux, right? So those are good skills. Yeah.
Even Microsoft is the same one.
Absolutely, right? Microsoft's building it in, right?
Yeah.
I mean, the fact that you can get a shell in Windows 10 now is pretty, like, for those of us who've been around, it's mind-boggling. It's cool. I mean, I love that Microsoft sort of changed their tune in adopting more of that open source mentality and building some of these things in. Now, when we look at that and we say, so how am I going to figure out if somebody executed a command in the shell on a Windows host where I have this awesome EDR, right? I can tell every time they execute PowerShell. I can tell every time they execute Solitaire. What if they run commands in the Linux kernel? It's like, exactly. So then we have to make those decisions. Do we let that ride? Do we let people have access to that? Where someone like you, it sounds like, would love to have that on your machine, right? When the evil security guy says no, I mean, we got to balance those things. Fun.
PowerShell, what do you see as the future of PowerShell? It's used everywhere, but we're finding more and more vulnerabilities with it or ways it can be misused.
Yeah.
Do you see companies locking that down? Or do you see them not locking it down and having to accept the risk or put up other barriers around it to manage risk? Or what do you see with that?
I think to lock it down or to like literally say thou shalt not run PowerShell, I just don't think it's not tenable in most orgs, because many of our big applications at the end of the day are making PowerShell commands now. I think that, so PowerShell's been the focus of like advanced IR teams have been spending probably the last 2 to 3 years on PowerShell and like building a capability of logging PowerShell. So the big good companies are getting there where they can at least see what PowerShell's doing. But there's a lot of companies that aren't there yet. So I think it's going to continue. Microsoft has built a much better capability into the tools to be able to see what's going on. And vendors are starting to build, you know, your EDR companies are building capabilities to watch PowerShell. So it's more visibility. I can tell that this happened and these were the commands that were run. Therefore, I can know when something malicious happened. PowerShell's been awesome for malware authors, though. I mean, it's been such a boom, right? Like, it's just been, again, it's hilarious. Microsoft, for years, got criticized for not having much of a scripting capability. Like, I remember reading, like, literally batch files. And now there's this really robust capability. So I guess short answer, Bree, is it's here to stay. You're not shutting it down. I think there's some things you can do to protect yourself a little bit, but it's really, you got to have visibility into PowerShell so you can react when something goes on. You know, if you've got Word documents that are spawning PowerShell, you need to see that. You know, that's a good example.
And even like for your really advanced attackers, they're moving away from PowerShell.
Yeah.
Because of how much visibility defenders have now. So they're going to like straight .NET or C# or
Yeah, right, like
other,
C# stuff.
Other ways that they can run their code.
And that's what's interesting is sort of again, that's because they need to compete against the best detection and response teams, right? Who have now figured out how to deal with PowerShell. But the other, like, literally hundreds of thousands of companies in the world, right? That might be like your top 5 to 10%. The rest of the companies in the world still are dealing with this. So I think you're going to see the crimeware folks continue to use it like crazy. Your advanced nation states, they'll probably do something else. It's fun. It's great. It's really powerful, though. You know, no pun intended. But if you actually watch PowerShell execution, you'd be amazed at what applications run it, right? We just put in a new identity system, and it's like PowerShell. Like, oh, okay. Not going to ban that.
I don't know if you're going to ban it from users or just try to keep it to some users.
It's tough. I think it's something you got to almost live with. Now, I'd love to get to the point where, like, your code is always signed, so you could tell what code was trusted. But again, that would require, like, vendors actually signing their code, which is, like, you know, we wish that would happen. You could do that internally, though. I think you could get to the point where if you're going to run a PowerShell script, you have to sign it with this certificate. Therefore, we know it's trusted. I mean, I think you could get there. Take some work. So I think most people have said it's more worth our time to invest in having visibility into PowerShell than it is into trying to stop it or trying to, you know, kind of control it. But, you know, your mileage may vary a little bit. So, all right. Thank you, guys. It was good time, and I'll be around for a little bit after if anybody has any other questions or comments. So thanks to everybody on the internet as well. We'll talk to you soon.
See ya.